Welcome to the Alcove. I'm Mark Malero. My guest today is Amity Shlaes. She's a syndicated columnist at Bloomberg and a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. Her latest book is entitled The Forgotten Man, A New History of the Great Depression. She's here to discuss it with us today and to put some historical perspective on the current financial crisis. Amity Shlaes, welcome.
Thank you.
It's interesting because there are many interpretations of the Great Depression. And your recent book, The Forgotten Man, is said to be a reinterpretation. I wonder if you can just give me a kind of a capsule summary of what the argument is that you put forth in The Forgotten Man.
Well, to know that, you have to know what the argument was before. Before, what it was, basically was, the 20s were frivolous. The market went unreasonably high. Herbert Hoover, the president, did nothing. Roosevelt came in, he did a lot of things, they made us feel better. Maybe they didn't all work perfectly, but it was in the right direction. And the war ended it all anyhow. World War II ended it all anyhow. We're on Roosevelt's side in the war, so we'll overlook the 30s. And what the Forgotten Man book does, it doesn't address the war, but basically it says that stuff that happened before the war is really important, because when we have our next downturn or our next problems, as now, we want to know what didn't work and what did in that other big period, the 1930s, the period when it really was serious. And I ended up looking first at the 20s, and you know what? The 20s weren't frivolous. They were great and a little frivolous. They were a great decade. A lot of important stuff happened. We developed all kinds of new technology. We got radios, we got electricity, we drove around in cars. And the emphasis on frivolity is probably misplaced in terms of accuracy. The second question about Hoover was actually really pretty activist. He was like a McKinsey consultant, you know, the smartest guy in the room.
Right.
I know everything, you just have to follow me, or like, oldest child, follow me.
Okay.
And if you don't, I'm offended. You know, that thing. And then revision 3 would be that the New Deal had set, and so Hoover was counterproductive. He hurt the economy. And then FDR really hurt the economy. And we can love FDR for a lot of reasons, but the New Deal itself, plus what Hoover did, both prolonged what didn't have to be a Great Depression. The Depression had to be, probably, but it didn't have to be as long as it was, all the way to 1940, from 1929. And the reason there was that duration, the reason the Depression was so great so long, was missteps by government, Hoover and Roosevelt.
Right, and I think you had said that in particular one of the great missteps, in your opinion, was the idea of intervention, that exacerbated a great crisis. Was that both by Hoover and Roosevelt, where intervention, in your opinion, caused it to be extended, the crisis?
Yes, it's part of this is a monetary story. The Great Depression is about a great deflation. At the beginning, there just simply wasn't enough money, and the Fed and the Treasury didn't understand that. And looking at that, what you see is, well, the Fed and the government and everyone else were looking at the economy, and they said, gee, that's fluff, the 20s. It's not real. I see a lot of inflation. I see a lot of water. So I'm going to be tight. I'm going to have tight monetary policy. And really, it wasn't so much fluff. There was a lot of real growth. So they underestimated the success of the 1920s and what the economy was doing. They didn't trust the economy and therefore hurt it. And then the intervening part, yes, starts with Hoover. He did things like he blamed short sellers for the trouble. Well, short sales in stocks can be troubling, but often they're just the market expressing their reality as in a beneficially fast, quick way. And then, so Hoover did a lot of counterproductive things, signed the Smoot-Hawley tariff. That hurt the economy and it hurt our political relationship with Europe. And FDR really intervened, and those interventions scared the market and people.
So how do you feel that about the current global economic crisis? Do you think it's overstated if people make any comparison to the Great Depression? It's obviously not as bad, at least not yet, but how would you characterize the crisis that we now face?
The current trouble is to the trouble of the Great Depression as a little rainstorm is to a Katrina. They are just an order of magnitude greater in trouble. You see 25% unemployment in the early 30s, people losing their house when they own 90% of the house and just own money on 10%. Today it's the reverse. So right now we are not where they were. The reason people compare the two is there's a credit tightening as there was then. Home prices are down as they were then, and that's actually relatively rare in the US economy. And we have a concern that we don't know what we're doing, and that's definitely like then.
I'm also wondering, it's interesting in your book you talk about the courage of ordinary Americans during the Great Depression, and that's very much an untold story that your book chronicles. When you look at the current crisis today, do you believe in some of these old ideas of self-reliance, even perhaps some of these libertarian ideas of, personal responsibility and freedom, and that Americans themselves have to take responsibility for their own financial well-being as much as we expect the government to do certain things, that we also expect us as consumers and as citizens to do our part?
Well, a great monetary error, such as having a deflation the way they did in the early 30s, there's nothing the individual can do about that. That's the one thing the government has to do. So no on that. And that was the problem then. They turned inward and said, oh, self-reliance is the answer to monetary. Unfortunately, it can't be. So one person alone can't do it. The question of homeownership, however, is a different question, and the question of corporate responsibility. Should an executive take a big pay cut because his company failed and the taxpayer is bailing it out? Those are real questions, and we want to ask that of Wall Street, and we want to ask it of Main Street and homes as well. Are we looking at home buying and owning as a right, a privilege, or an entitlement? Probably assuming that everyone deserves to own a house is something we can't do because the government can't afford that, even our government, to guarantee everyone ownership of a house. Just as we probably the government bailing out every company, it can't do that either. There's a limit to what Washington can do, and we've just about reached it.
With this current crisis being so global, recently there was the G20 conference, people talking about maybe the need for another, like a Bretton Woods 2. Do you see a need for that in terms of international regulation of economies? Are we entering a new era, or should we be entering a new era where there is more regulation internationally?
Well, the bright line for the issue of regulation is we want to be able to trade with other countries, and we want them to know what they're buying here, and we want to know what we're buying there. Clearly, many foreign investors didn't know the quality of the instruments they were buying when they were buying pieces of mortgages. And that was partly because we had bad ratings. So you want to have clarity, transparency, and standardization. Whether you need one giant entity to produce that is a second question, or whether you want an agreement where we all say we count apples the same way and not as oranges. So that's a big one.
Are we also in an era where a lot of the 20th century was marked by different competing ideologies in economics, whether you talk about Keynesianism or you talk about, Friedman-type policies? Are we entering an era where it needs to be perhaps more about a pragmatism? Because, again, you have these different ideologies, and I wonder, again, with economics being so international today and things are so tied together, in a postmodern era, is the world calling for less ideology in terms of economics and more practicality?
Well, some of the philosophies are more accurate than other of the philosophies, and that is why the debate is so hot.
Right.
So, but yes, the main economic philosophy of the second half of the last century was Keynesianism. And Keynesianism says we spend our way out, and if we don't spend, the engine freezes and we're stuck on a hill, and that's what happened in the Depression. The question is, and also that the consumer is the hero, the lion who will bring it all back. It's the shopper, and you see that in the news. Oh, bad news, Friday, consumers not spending, consumer confidence. But you can argue it the other way and say the producer is the one who matters. And that's more classical economics. That says supply creates its own demand. If you offer something really good, in that way the economy moves forward from the offer side. And both have their accuracies. Yeah, so there I would be pragmatic. Both have their accuracies, both sides. Those of us who are talking a bit more about classical economics are saying, remember the supply side. And by that, we don't just mean Ronald Reagan and four guys. We mean the economics that existed before the Great Depression and for so many years, classical economics.
How do you look at all the various bailouts that have already been approved and that are pending right now in terms of the government bailing out now even the states. The governors are going to Washington, this sort of thing. Is this an immediate and necessary thing, or is this something where maybe there should be more thinking in terms of, wait a minute, this is the kind of thing where it's multiple billions of dollars, maybe even trillions of dollars. This money's being spent very quickly. What's your opinion about it? Is it a short-term stimulus that needs to happen very quickly, or is it the thing that maybe should be parceled out over more time?
Well, the great problem with the crisis is the urgency. Oh, you have to do it or it'll all fall apart. That's the argument. And when you have an emergency, then first thing you do is aggregate power. You say, give me all the controls because I need to fix it. I'm the doctor in charge of the emergency room or the leader in the country, and I need double power because the crisis is doubly large. So I am more in the wait a minute category that says, let's have a rules-based system, not a deals-based system. It shouldn't matter whether you went to college with the guy who works at Treasury so you can get your company into the right queue. It shouldn't create second and third K streets in Washington for all of us to figure out who deserves what cut of this enormous amount of money. It should be, here are the rules. Some of them none of us are going to like, but they're rules, they're clear, and so let's play the game again. The model you want to look at is Japan. In Japan, they had a very deal-based effort at recovery in the 90s. Oh, and we won't allow to mention what was really happening with this financial entity, and we won't say that, and we'll do infrastructure spending, and the famous infrastructure in Japan in the 1990s. Did it help Japan? Sort of, but it was really a lost decade for Japan, and we don't want to emulate that, it all being about who you know. Our markets should be clear and be decided by prices so that everyone from overseas can see what the price is as well and then enter the market.
Maybe my last question for you is, people talk famously about FDR's first 100 days. If you were advising President Obama, what would you say to him that he should try to accomplish within his first 100 days, his first 6 months, his first year, especially with economics?
Well, this is a very difficult question, but the main answer would be clear financial regulation, a reform of the financial regulatory system to capture some of the entities that could not be captured, because if the government is going to subsidize them, it ought to regulate them. The main problem is that we've socialized losses and left profits private, as one professor said. That's horrible. So make the rules of regulation of finance clear. I would also say, and you see the administration doing that, the new administration, think again about those tax increases, because Keynesians and supply-siders alike are concerned about an increase in taxes for different reasons. From the Keynesian point of view, a tax increase is the opposite of stimulus. It's a de-stimulus, and it offsets, hurts any stimulus such as spending. So we have a lot of tax increases planned, windfall, income tax, estate tax, raised capital gains tax was mentioned in the campaign. And you can see already the new administration rethinking those, and that's really very helpful. Okay. What we'd like on that is clarity. Too, there won't be a change until 2011, ever. That would help the economy, and it would even make it come back way much faster.
Very good. Well, thank you very much for being here.
Oh, no, thank you.
Thank you. All right. And thanks for joining us. We'll see you again soon.